Spider-Man 2 is a very unbalanced experience. It's loaded with unnaturalistic conversations and arbitrary plot points, but bookended by two storytelling highs, one captivating and high energy, one poignant and somber. Your moveset is massive, even more so when you interact with the skill tree and other upgrades, but a lot of the options at your disposal feel superfluous considering how short the game is and how linear many of its missions are. The proportion of New York you can access is far greater than it was in the past two games, and still includes functional NPC systems and detailed exteriors. But when you can swing across the city in a matter of minutes, there's not much of a reason to be walking around observing these details. I mostly enjoyed the game though for what I was able to get out of it, even if I think there's a lot of squandered potential here. In terms of its open world game design, Spider-Man 2 is unfortunately like a lot of other AAA adventure games on the PlayStation, in the sense that its open world blueprint doesn't totally coincide with the amount of freedom the player is given. I used to be really anal about this. Back when I reviewed Biomutant, a game with more problems than I can count, the only thing I really talked about was how it limited player agency with nagging objectives, linear mission design, and invisible walls. Over time, though, I've realized that, first of all, the more ambitious a game is, the more limitations it's going to have, and that's a sacrifice that just needs to be made sometimes. Second of all, unless a game constantly inhibits any sort of creativity and player expression to the point where being told no is unavoidable, I don't think restriction in open world games is a massive problem. Anyway, my point wasn't that Spider-Man 2 has a lot of those issues, rather that the missions are designed in a pretty linear fashion, and there are a lot of instances where the entirety of New York City is sidelined for the sake of action-packed sequences that occur within factories, underground, and in other segmented areas. Most of the points of interest around the city that you can access while free roaming are just side content. I remember early on in the game playing as Miles meeting up with his uncle, who is a retired supervillain. He tells him to scavenge the city for old Prowler suit components. I thought I would actually be able to find unique suits in those areas that I would instantly be able to equip, but instead every piece of side content in this game just rewards you with tech parts, or these tokens, which can eventually be used to upgrade skills and craft new suits. Even though the lack of variety in rewards is slightly frustrating and some of the side content leans heavily on repetition, there's something exhilarating about gliding or swinging through the air, landing briefly to beat up some criminals on a rooftop or stop a getaway car, and then getting right back to it. The combat in essence is pretty similar to the first two games, but there are some cool abilities you obtain over the course of the game that keep it from getting stale, like parrying and gadgets that you use for your special attacks. Not to mention, you're forced to swap between Miles and Peter, who have fairly different movesets, which keeps the gameplay fresh. Another change to the combat isn't healing. In the first game, you would just mash the down button whenever you needed to heal, and for pretty much every attack you got in, you could heal just a little bit. In this game, you need to fill a special ability meter by parrying or attacking or dodging a certain number of times, and then you can heal by a lot. It's a frustrating alternative, but a warranted and completely understandable one. Story-wise, the game has both its absolute highs and complete fumbles in the departments of both the characters and the plot. One of the primary antagonists, Kraven, is an extremely one-dimensional villain. His sole motivation is to find some vigilante who's worthy of taking his life. You find out about halfway through the game that he's on this hunt because he has a terminal disease, and he doesn't just want to slowly fade to dust, he wants to be killed in a way people won't forget. This is revealed to the player in the most cliche, lazy video game approach to exposition, a voice memo that lasts about 15 seconds. Honestly, I think Kraven would have been more interesting if it turned out he was just some maniacal killer with a death wish, but we got this instead. Of course, the real villain of the game is Venom, who amalgamates from symbiotes into a suit that traps Harry Osborn. There's a chunk of the game, though, where the suit is used as an upgrade for Peter after a near-death encounter, and it's pretty awkward. The 2018 game excellently portrayed Dr. Octavius' slow-burning descent into madness as a result of his own technology. In this game, Peter becomes very mean all of a sudden after the suit he's wearing starts to get to his mind. It's hardly persuasive since this version of him is like the exact opposite of evil. They literally redesigned him to have the most punchable face imaginable, and in the first 30 minutes of this game, he says,
"I think I'm gonna start a petition. Replace all the gun clubs with something better. Like a compliment club. Compliments don't hurt anyone, and they're free."
So yeah, he just starts lipping off to everyone out of nowhere, and it's both corny and a lazy way of developing a character arc. Of course, the other main playable character is Miles Morales, who I'm sort of conflicted on. The big red flag to me was that he never shuts up about his college essay, which he doesn't even have any progress on until the end of the game. I've been through the college application process, and the essay wasn't that difficult. I actually wrote mine about these game reviews, and it wasn't that great, but hey, I got accepted. I don't know why the college essay is the only thing that's ever brought up about his school life, but otherwise I think he's an alright character. The interactions he has with his mom and his friends, even while using sign language, feel genuine for the most part. Certain characters don't bounce off each other too well though, because many of them are unrealistically professional in their manners of speaking. I feel that way about pretty much every story-driven open-world game, but there are some instances here where it's especially painful, like the Coney Island Boardwalk section. The way this game conveys the nostalgia that Pete and his friend Harry have for their high school years seems really artificial. Another problem is that throughout the first half of the game, side characters and reformed villains are constantly included within the main story to set up side content around the map. While they tend to provide balance for the rest of the cast of main characters and their dialogue, their inclusion segments and dilutes the overarching plot that involves Kraven and Venom as the sole antagonists. Spider-Man 2 isn't necessarily a bad game, but it's inferior to its predecessor, which was flawed in its own right. Like I said at the beginning, I think a lot of the chips ended up in the wrong place. You have this incredibly detailed, albeit totally inaccurate, rendition of NYC that is only ever shown off to the player in the most arbitrary ways, like with these photo ops. Otherwise, you as the player really have to disrupt the core gameplay loop to appreciate those details. The combat and traversal are really the highlight of this game, but the story and dialogue feel disjointed and highly forced at times, and that's what really kills it a little bit for me.